Before evaluating the artifact for this section, it's important to talk about the process that's being used to derive the learning goals for this section. The learning goals in this section are modeled after a methodology provided by the Midwest Comprehensive Center and American Institutes for Research. The idea behind this learning goals section is to learn about learning first, to give students the skills they need to engage in deeper learning or metacognition skills. The goal is to hopefully have some intrinsic motivation and self-accomplishment when the kids are designing their own learning with their own student choices, meaning they get to pick their own book and their own forms of assessment. During this unit, with their learning goals, they have the capacity to manage their own learning through progress checks, which I'll use by demonstrating and reflecting on artifact A2c. The idea behind using learning goals here is to direct student actions, to assess their progress, and to drive their own learning over time. The theory of goal theory suggests that there's a link between goal setting and task performance that's mediated by a cycle of self-regulated learning. One method that I use to help developing learning goals with my students is to share my lesson plans with them and show them how my learning goals are as a teacher. This way, it kind of gives kids a model to combat some unfamiliarity and apprehension about setting their own goals. I modeled that process, like I said, using the Midwest Comprehensive Center of American Institute for Research's model by walking the students through my thought process, teaching them what metacognition is through my methodology of creating lesson plans. I also share with them the learning objectives and standards, which helps me develop my short and long-term goals for them. I share the instructional strategies, assessments, and resources that I'd like them to choose from in order when building their own curriculum, the pacing that the curriculum is all about, and making the most of the resources that are available to me, teaching them about self-efficiency, which is a big part of this process. This demonstrates the importance of learning goals and learning to learn by providing a model to my students. I check in with my students on their progress during different parts of the unit when they're working independently, and I poll them on that process, which is what this artifact is all about. Students will create their own goals based on the methodology that's outlined in the Midwest Comprehensive Center methodology. Students get to pick their own assessments based on interest, which falls in the category of goal theory, as outlined by the Midwest Comprehensive Center. Students will get to create reading goals for themselves. This falls under the category of goal attainment. And this can be something as simple as, trying to figure out what the novel's about by looking at comprehension, plot and character development, or even symbolism. Students can create some big picture goals for themselves, which the Midwest Comprehensive Center refers to as goal orientation. These are higher level thinking questions and higher level analysis, such as themes and motifs that are emerging in text, as well as relevance and connectivity, such as how does this book connect to other things I've read or other things I will experience. Students will develop a process for the goals themselves through self-observation. This can involve something as simple as pacing and making sure they're getting their reading done, or something like completing their assessments and making sure that their work that they selected for themselves is being completed. Lastly, are you making the most of the unit sources that are being made available to you? This lends itself to that self-efficiency piece I was talking before and includes a growth mindset. Students in this case will be assessing their support and whether there should be additional provisions needed to increase their learning, or is the intrinsic rewards they're looking for being met? In achieving this goal with my students, I do a check-in with them, which is what the artifact is all about. I'll share the artifact with you in just a second here, but the premise behind it is that it's a survey or a poll in which I poll the students for feedback based on the learning goals they've created at the beginning of the unit. I ask them questions like what assessments did they choose, which again lends itself to goal theory. Why did you create these goals? Goal attainment. What are you hoping to achieve? Goal orientation. Where are you at in the process? The self-observation piece. And then making the most of your teacher and or your book falls under the self-efficiency and growth mindset. Let's take a look at the survey here just to kind of get a sense of exactly what we're working from here. The artifact, as you can see here, is something that's created for the students based off of the book that they're reading. Obviously, they're going to use their contact information so I know whose book it is. The students are going to indicate to me what they selected. This falls under the category of what they're choosing. This is their learning goals they have for themselves. And the assessments are all unique, as you can see. One is a study guide, which involves just answering some short answer questions about comprehension. The Volume 2 growth chart is a little bit more comprehensive in that it compares two characters together in the story at different points. Literature and the Creature is a higher order thinking assessment that involves the students making synthesis connections to books that the creature finds in chapter 15. Where do we see these books kind of having some relevance with the book that they're reading? There's a short story by Miss Brill in the website Common Lit, which is a companion piece that the students can use that they're going to read and answer 5 multiple choice questions and answer a short essay comparing loneliness to the character in the story. What Makes a Good Life is a TED Talk, which hones in on the speaking and listening standards, and it's done by Robert Waldinger, which features a Harvard study that's been taking place over the last 75 years about what makes a good life for people. Students can watch the TED Talk and make a connection to Frankenstein and try to figure out where do we see Victor Frankenstein or maybe his creature, devoid of a good life? What could they do to make improvements to their own lives? Once we get to question four is where goal theory starts coming in, the beginning part of Midwest Comprehensive Center's methodology. Why did you choose these 2 assessments for yourself? Forces the students into some metacognition where they think about the choices that they made. Some of them may have chosen the assignment based off of familiarity with the task, but other tasks here are slightly more comprehensive and involve more higher order. Perhaps there's a better intrinsic reward for accomplishing a higher order thinking piece. Maybe there's something to be said about making a connection between a companion piece like Miss Brill and the actual text itself. The context of loneliness is important because it has not only connections to the piece of literature they're reading, but with so many students suffering from loneliness and depression during the pandemic, perhaps there's some real world connections the students can make as well. What Makes for a Good Life, like I mentioned before, is a Harvard study, so it's always interesting to kind of see how truth and fiction work hand in hand. Question number 5. This gets into some bit of the context. This is your goal attainment question because it forces the students to think about what they're hoping to get out of the assignments. Like it says here, what do you hope to learn from these assignments that will contribute to what you're reading? So again, it's kind of a metacognition question, but it kind of forces the students to think about the goals that they have for their reading. Number 6 is a goal orientation question. What do you hope to learn from these assignments that will contribute to your real world experience? And again, goal orientation has to do with representing goals that are higher order that exist outside of the context of what they're reading, making connections in terms of connectivity with the real world and relevance that they have in their own lives. Questions 7, 8, and 9 are questions that kind of center around self-observation. Self-observation questions in this instance ask the students directly how far along they are in terms of their pacing. How do they feel about the pacing in the unit so far? How do they feel about exploring the use of a graphic novel on their own? All those questions are all kind of self-reflection questions that kind of get them to think about and observe the work that they're doing, the process that they're completing, and how far along they are in that process. Questions 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 center around self-efficacy. We talked about that before in terms of growth mindset as well, because it helps the students think about the resources that are being made available to them to see if they're getting everything they can out of the text. And again, this ties into some of that intrinsic reward we talked about before, recognizing that there's other resources out there, like making the use of chats and things like that and talking about the book. And then literally setting goals for yourselves, recognizing where you are in the process, what do you have left to do for the week, and then more importantly, putting that process into action. What is my goal for today? What am I looking to do to meet that goal? And then subsequently, what is my goal for tomorrow? What would I like to do to meet that goal? So again, these self-efficacy questions force the students to kind of think about their learning. Like I talked about before, learning to learn is an important part of this, and recognizing that not only that there's a process involved with learning to learn, but maintaining the goals that are established in that sense will help them become better thinkers and more efficient readers. So last question here, how can Mr. Barbado be more useful to me to accomplish my goals? Again, that's a growth mindset question because it forces students to kind of think about, am I getting the most out of all the resources that are available to me? If I'm struggling with something, what can I do to use my teacher to kind of help me in that capacity? Right? So if we go back to the original presentation, again, you can kind of see how it's kind of organized a little bit here, that using the Midwest Comprehensive Center's framework for these questions helps build students in terms of being able to create learning goals, but also maintain the progress of those learning goals at the end.